Imagine a runaway monk miraculously having escaped execution, with no lineage, no family, no real claim to the throne. And then, you become the Russian Tsar. Not for a day, not for a week, but for a whole year. This isn't fantasy. It's the true story of False Dmitry I, the most audacious, most improbable impostor in Russian history, who managed to seize power from the legitimate dynasty and deceive an entire nation. His real name was Grigory Otrepyev, or perhaps Yuri Bogdanovich Otrepyev. But what difference does a name make when you declare yourself the miraculously saved Tsarevich Dmitry, the younger son of Ivan the Terrible? This was the very Tsarevich who, according to the official version, died in Uglish in 1591, having accidentally stabbed himself during an epileptic seizure. Or, as whispered in every corner, he was murdered on the orders of Boris Godunov, then regent and later Tsar. It was on this bloody legend that our hero built his short-lived empire. He didn't just make a claim. He brought this deception to life with such conviction that even the most astute politicians of the era were left bewildered. False Dmitry acted not like a common rebel or insurgent, but like a Tsar, possessing absolute confidence in his right to the throne. His demeanor clearly demonstrated astonishing charisma and considerable intellect. He knew how to speak, persuade, and inspire, attracting supporters from all walks of life, from humble Cossacks and peasants to noble boyars and European adventurers eager for glory and wealth. His emergence during the time of troubles was no mere coincidence. It was a direct consequence of a profound national crisis. The country, exhausted by famine, Godunov's repressions, and endless rumors of illegitimate rule, was desperate for a miracle, for a savior. False Dmitry masterfully exploited these sentiments, promising peasants freedom, boyars justice, and a return to the good old days. He told the people what they longed to hear, delivering his message with such passion that many saw him as a true anointed of God. His march on Moscow, which began with a small band of followers, quickly snowballed into an unstoppable force. He gained momentum not only through military strength, but also through propaganda and the widespread belief in his miraculous salvation. When in 1605, following the death of Boris Godunov, he made his triumphant entry into the capital, he was welcomed as a true Tsar. People prostrated themselves, kissed his hands, and wept tears of joy. Even the mother of the true Dmitry, Nun Marfa, formerly Maria Nagaya, publicly recognized him as her son. Whether this was cunning, desperation, or genuine belief remains a hotly debated question among historians. Yet the fact remained: a runaway monk, an impostor, had seized the throne of the Muscovite state. His reign was brief, just 11 months, but it left an indelible mark. He attempted reforms and demonstrated independent judgment, which displeased both the boyars and the church. He was too European for conservative Moscow, too free-thinking for those who expected a Tsar to adhere blindly to tradition. His actions, such as open communication with foreigners, marriage to the Catholic Marina Menisek, and disregard for certain Russian customs, gradually eroded the fragile belief upon which his power rested. The central question isn't what he did, but how he achieved it. How could a person who, by all accounts, was a nobody, convince an entire nation that he was its legitimate ruler? What internal forces drove him, and what external circumstances allowed this unprecedented deception to become a reality? To truly dissect the phenomenon of False Dmitry I, merely listing the facts of his ascent is insufficient. We must delve into the very depths of his formation to understand what compelled a provincial nobleman, and later a runaway monk, to challenge the entire system. Declare himself a miraculously saved Tsarevich, and ultimately occupy the Moscow throne. This is a story not only of political intrigue, but also of the colossal strength of a personality forged in the crucible of humiliation and boundless ambition. Grigory Otrepyev, known in his secular life as Yuri Bogdanovich, was born in the mid-1560s into a family of impoverished Galach nobles. His father died when Yuri was still a child, leaving the family without support in a world where status was determined not just by birth, but by the ability to defend one's interests. This early experience undoubtedly instilled in him a profound sense of insecurity and, simultaneously, a burning need to prove his significance. His path eventually led him to Moscow, where he served at the Romanov court before, for reasons not entirely clear, taking monastic vows. A monastic cell, it seemed, was to be his fate, forever severing him from the world of worldly passions and power. However, for a man whose ambitions had already been stirred, monastic life could become not a path to humility, but another source of frustration. Within the walls of the Chudov monastery, one of the intellectual centers of that time, Grigory gained access to books, chronicles, and, crucially, to rumors and political intrigues. He witnessed powerful boyars weaving conspiracies, observed how favorites rose and fell, and how precarious the power of even Boris Godunov was. He saw the accustomed order collapsing, the country plunging into chaos. It was here, within the monastery walls, against the backdrop of turmoil and uncertainty caused by famine, repression, and whispers of Godunov's illegitimate rule, that Grigory Otrepyev reached his point of no return. He didn't just read chronicles about Tsarevich Dmitry's death. He apparently reinterpreted them, seeing in this tragedy not merely a historical fact but a potential key to his own destiny. His subsequent actions reveal that he refused to accept his predetermined fate. Instead, he recognized that amidst widespread uncertainty, where old rules were crumbling, audacity and an unwavering belief in his own exceptionalism could become a formidable weapon. He renounced his monastic vows, defied both ecclesiastical and secular authorities, and fled the monastery. This was more than a mere breach of monastic rule. It was an act of absolute rupture with his past, a deliberate leap into the unknown. The brutal customs of the Muscovite tsardom were the life of an ordinary tsot. Person was cheap, and destiny was dictated by birth and connections. Paradoxically, also created opportunities for those willing to risk everything. While social mobility existed, it was fraught with mortal danger. Every step upward could lead to a plunge into the abyss. Otrepyev, possessing neither noble birth, nor wealth, nor connections, realized that the only thing he could offer was a grandiose lie, presented as a profound truth. His incredible courage, charisma, and persuasive ability were honed by years of observation, humiliation, and ultimately, a decisive choice. He perceived that the people yearned for justice and a legitimate czar, and he was prepared to give them what they desired, even if it was a fantasy. Thus, the personality of False Dmitry I was shaped not only by his individual qualities, but also by the harsh realities of an era where despair fostered incredible audacity and ambition found fertile ground in chaos. It was this psychological preparation, this inner fire, that later enabled him to execute a series of astonishing gambits, each propelling him higher up the ladder of power. His path to the throne was not merely a daring adventure, but a meticulously planned and brilliantly executed multi-stage strategy, where every setback transformed into a new springboard. Imagine, the runaway monk, Grigory Otrepyev, finds himself in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. His plan was audaciously insane: to convince Polish magnates, and subsequently all of Europe, that he was the miraculously saved Tsarevich Dmitry. He didn't just declare himself an heir. He crafted an entire legend, meticulously detailing it with convincing specifics gleaned from court chronicles and rumors he had accessed in the monastery. The execution of this deception was masterful. Otrepyev, adopting the name Dmitry, presented himself before powerful Polish noblemen, such as Prince Adam Wisniewski and Voivode Jerzy Mniszek. He carried himself with royal dignity, demonstrating impressive knowledge of heraldry, diplomacy, and even the intricacies of Russian court etiquette, which greatly astonished the Poles. He didn't simply ask for assistance. He promised generous territorial concessions, the return of Smolensk and Seversk lands, support for Catholicism in Russia, and even the pledge of a joint crusade against the Ottoman Empire. His charisma was so potent that he secured not only financial backing from Mniszek, but also permission to recruit an army. Soon, Polish noblemen, Cossacks, Lithuanian mercenaries, and most PP. Crucially, thousands of Russian fugitives and discontented individuals, drawn by rumors of a legitimate czar, flocked to his banner. He began disseminating letters throughout Rus', denouncing Godunov as a usurper and murderer, and promising the populace justice and tax relief. An unexpected reversal occurred in the winter of 1605. After a series of successful skirmishes, his army confronted Boris Godunov's main forces near Dobranichi. It was a crushing defeat. Most of his Polish mercenaries fled, the Cossacks dispersed, and False Dmitry himself barely escaped, retreating to Putyvl. It seemed his end was inevitable. However, it was at this point that his astonishing adaptability and sheer luck manifested. Instead of losing heart, he utilized Putovo as a new base. The local population, exhausted by famine and Godunov's repressions, saw in the miraculously saved Tsarevich their last hope and joined him en masse. This sudden popular support, combined with Godunov's indecisiveness, in failing to deliver a decisive blow, proved fatal for Boris. The repercussions of this turn were astounding. In April 1605, Boris Godunov suddenly died. The Russian army, leaderless and already weakened by internal discord, began to defect en masse to False Dmitry. The path to Moscow lay open. His triumphant entry into Moscow and the subsequent months on the throne marked the zenith of his power. He conducted himself as a true monarch, exuding confidence in his infallibility and right to rule. False Dmitry plunged into state affairs, displaying remarkable energy and a keen desire for reform. He received petitions from common people, promised to alleviate serfdom, and sought to streamline judicial procedures. His court became a melting pot where Western customs blended with Russian traditions. He openly interacted with foreigners and welcomed European ambassadors, a practice unheard of for previous Moscow czars. The culmination of his reign was his marriage to Marina Mniszek, a Catholic, which in itself posed a significant challenge to the Orthodox Church and deeply ingrained traditions. His embrace of this European orientation was ostentatious. Thousands of Polish and Lithuanian guests arrived in Moscow to celebrate the wedding. Their behavior, boisterous feasts, dancing, and blatant disregard for Russian customs and fasts, deeply shocked Muscovites. False Dmitry appeared to deliberately ignore the escalating discontent. He permitted his Polish guests to behave unrestrainedly, as if to impress upon Moscow that new rules now governed. He even entertained the notion of forming an anti-Ottoman coalition with European powers, an idea completely alien to traditional Russian foreign policy. His actions indicated that he considered himself above all conventions, relying on his charisma and the people's belief in his miraculous salvation. Blinded by success, his actions grew increasingly audacious, and his disregard for the opinions of the boyars and Grigory I clergy became ever more apparent. The unexpected turn was that this very display of power and deviation from traditions proved to be his fatal error. The boyar opposition, led by the cunning Vasily Shwisky, whom False Dmitry had previously pardoned for a conspiracy, deftly exploited the popular discontent. They circulated rumors that the Tsar was not the true Dmitry, but an impostor, a heretic, intent on converting Russes to Catholicism and ceding it to the Poles. The unrestrained revelry of the Polish guests in Moscow, coupled with their defiant behavior, only added fuel to the fire. The people who had so recently welcomed him as a savior now saw him as the Antichrist. The consequences were catastrophic. On the night of May 17, 1606, with Moscow still filled with Polish guests, the boyars initiated a rebellion. Church bells rang, and crowds of Muscovites, gripped by panic and hatred for the Polish invaders and the heretic Tsar, stormed the Kremlin. False Dmitry attempted to escape by jumping out a window, but was caught and brutally murdered. His body was displayed in Red Square, then burned, and his ashes, mixed with gunpowder, were shot towards Poland. Thus ended the reign of the most audacious impostor in Russian history. Yet his story is not merely the tale of one man. Behind him stood powerful forces, each playing their own game. When the runaway monk, Grigory Otrepyev, appeared in Polish lands, he didn't just find refuge. He found individuals who saw him not as an impostor, but as a valuable tool. His secret patrons were powerful Polish magnates, each with their own objectives. Chief among them were Prince Adam Wisniewski, the first to believe, or at least pretend to believe, in the miraculously saved Tsarevich, and Voivode Jerzy Mniszek, whose ambitions knew no bounds. While Wisniewski provided False Dmitry with shelter and initial support, it was Mniszek who became his primary sponsor, investing vast sums and, more significantly, offering his daughter Marina Mniszek as the future Russian Tsarina. These Polish magnates were not acting out of altruism. They pursued clear benefits. Jerzy Mniszek, burdened by debts, anticipated colossal landholdings in Russia, a princely title, and potentially the Russian throne for his daughter through her descendants. He viewed False Dmitry as the key to immense wealth and political influence. The Catholic Church, represented by Pope Clement VIII, also saw in the impostor an opportunity to extend its influence over Orthodox Rus. Although Polish King Sigismund III Vasa offered no official support, he did not impede the adventure, understanding that a weakened Russia would benefit the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The detachment False Dmitry led to Moscow comprised Polish nobility, Cossacks, and Russian fugitives, each expecting their share of future spoils. However, not everyone was prepared to accept the newly arrived Tsarevich. Within Moscow, behind the Kremlin walls, resistance mounted. False Dmitry's primary antagonist, his shadowy opponent who upheld the old order, was Prince Vasily Shuisky. As a representative of one of the oldest and most influential boyar families, Shuisky possessed a sharp mind, cunning, and the ruthlessness essential for survival amidst Kremlin intrigues. It was Shuisky who, in 1591, had led the investigative commission into Tsarevich Dmitry's death in Uglich, and officially confirmed his demise from an accident. This made him a pivotal figure in the question of False Dmitry's legitimacy. When the impostor triumphantly entered Moscow, Shuisky was compelled to publicly acknowledge him as the miraculously saved Tsarevich and recant his previous testimony. He did so to preserve his life and his position at court, but his actions after False Dmitry's enthronement clearly demonstrate that he did not submit. Shuisky immediately began to undermine the new Tsar's authority. He spread rumors of the Tsar's imposture, highlighted False Dmitry's un-Russian customs, his disregard for Orthodox traditions, and his close ties with Poles and Catholics. Shuisky masterfully capitalized on the discontent of the boyars, who feared for their privileges, and the common people, who were outraged by the behavior of the Polish guests in Moscow. His ultimate goal was not merely to overthrow False Dmitry, but to enthrone a representative of a truly Russian, boyar lineage. This escalating conflict between an adventurer from the West and the entrenched Moscow aristocracy grew increasingly acute and inevitably led to a bloody climax that was already looming. The wedding with Marina Menisesh proved to be the final straw that exhausted Moscow's patience. The city, barely recovering from famine and turmoil, now witnessed an unprecedented spectacle daily. Thousands of Poles, who had arrived for the wedding, behaved like conquerors. They flagrantly disregarded Orthodox customs, openly displayed Catholic rites, hosted boisterous feasts, plundered shops, and at times assaulted women. Their audacious conduct, seemingly a mockery of centuries-old traditions, became a convenient pretext for those who had long awaited their opportunity. In the shadow of the Kremlin walls, under the cloak of night, a deadly intrigue brewed. Prince Vasily Shuisky, a man who just months earlier had sworn allegiance to False Dmitry, now became his executioner. He was the one who had once perjured himself, acknowledging the impostor as the miraculously saved Tsarevich to preserve his own life and position. Now, he utilized that very same lie to destroy him. Shuisky not only disseminated rumors about the Tsar's imposture, he skillfully fanned the flames of popular anger, pointing to the new sovereign's un-Russian customs, his disregard for Orthodox traditions, and most crucially, his connections with Poles and Catholics. He convinced the boyars that their privileges were imperiled and the common people that their faith was defiled. Shuisky's conspiracy was meticulously planned. He secured the support of influential boyars, such as the Golitsyn princes, as well as Moscow's merchant class and clergy. On the night of May 17, 1606, with many Polish guests still celebrating in Moscow and not yet departed, Shuisky gave the signal for the uprising. Early that morning before dawn, church bells throughout Moscow rang out an alarm. This was no ordinary tocsin, but a special summoning peal that signified mortal danger to the city. Tens of thousands of Muscovites, many armed with axes, clubs, and even old spears, poured into the streets. They advanced toward the Kremlin, chanting, "The Poles are beating the boyars! Save the Tsar!" A false cry designed to confuse and draw wavering individuals to the conspirators' side. Chaos reigned within the Kremlin. False Dmitry, awakened by the shouts and the alarm bell, initially failed to grasp the scale of the threat. His Polish bodyguards attempted to organize a defense, but they were too few, and the crowd's fury was too great. The palace gates were breached. The rebels stormed inside, searching for the Tsar. False Dmitry, realizing the mortal danger, made a desperate decision. He rushed out of his chambers, attempting to hide. Historians suggest he likely tried to reach a secret passage or simply disappear into the crowd. He leaped from a window into the Kremlin courtyard, breaking his leg in the fall. Wounded, he attempted to conceal himself in a bathhouse or one of the outbuildings, but he was quickly discovered. The rebels surrounded him. Among them were those who had recently cheered him and those who had always harbored doubts. At the head of the crowd stood boyars who, just yesterday, had bowed before him. Shuisky himself did not directly participate in the killing, but his men, following his orders, had led this mob here. False Dmitry was seized. He was asked one question that determined everything. "Tell us, who are you?" He, the Tsar who had ruled Russia for 11 months, who had deceived everyone, including himself, now stood before his executioners. He did not confess. He continued to insist on his royal origin, even with a knife at his throat. He was pierced with a spear, then finished off. His body was thrown onto Red Square, where it lay for several days, an object of mockery. People came to spit on it, to throw dirt. Then it was burned, and the ashes, mixed with gunpowder, were loaded into a cannon and fired towards Poland, a symbolic act of expelling the impostor and all that he represented. Thus ended the reign of Grigory Otrepyev, a man who succeeded in deceiving an entire nation and ascending to the throne. His fall was as swift and brutal as his rise. It starkly demonstrated how fragile power can be when founded on deception and the ambitions of others, and how quickly popular affection can transform into deadly hatred. This was more than just the execution of an impostor. It was a cry of despair and rage directed against everything perceived as alien and imposed. And this was merely the beginning of a new, even bloodier chapter in the history of the time of troubles. For the story of False Dmitry I, his ascent and downfall, delves far deeper than the mere adventure of one individual. It uncovers the mechanisms that allow deception to become reality, and illusions to serve as the driving force of entire historical epochs. The death of False Dmitry I, it seemed, should have brought an end to this audacious adventure. His body, subjected to the crowd's mockery, burned, and his ashes shot toward Poland, symbolized the definitive expulsion of imposture. Yet the paradox of Grigory Otrepyev's story lies precisely in the fact that his physical destruction did not lead to the obliteration of the myth. On the contrary, it only strengthened and transformed it, giving rise to a whole succession of new false Dmitrys, and ultimately plunging Rus deeper into the abyss of the time of troubles. The primary lesson of his ascent and fall is not simply the tale of a single deceiver, but a profound examination of the universal mechanisms that render society susceptible to even the most incredible falsifications. False Dmitry didn't merely deceive. He masterfully exploited deeply rooted aspirations and fears. Amidst widespread discontent, famine, repression, and the absence of a legitimate heir, people desperately yearned for a savior, a figure who could restore order and justice. He didn't just declare himself a Tsarevich, he embodied this hope. His words, his demeanor, his promises, all were meticulously calibrated to resonate with the collective unconscious. He didn't so much convince them of his royalty as he allowed people to convince themselves, offering them a convenient, desired version of reality. This was not only a deception, but also an act of profound self-deception on the part of those who so desperately wanted to believe. The mechanism operated flawlessly. First, he sowed seeds of doubt regarding Boris Godunov's legitimacy, then presented an alternative, far more appealing legend. He didn't demand blind faith. Rather, he provoked it, playing on emotions and the instinctive search for a truth that would align with their suffering. To renounce this faith would have been tantamount to admitting their own naivete and returning to despair. That is why even after his death, when Shuisky attempted to expose him as Otrepyev the runaway monk, many continued to harbor doubts. After all, acknowledging they had believed a lie would mean admitting their hopes were in vain. The story of False Dmitry I is a timeless narrative about the power of narrative over fact, about how collective desire can shape a truth that sometimes proves stronger than reality itself. It's a tale of how, in a vacuum of trust and legitimacy, any story, even the most fantastical, can take root if it addresses society's deepest needs. He was not a genius of evil. He was a genius at leveraging human nature within a specific context. His success rested not only on his personal charisma and audacious spirit, but also on people's readiness to perceive in him what they longed to see. It is this very mechanism, this readiness for self-deception, for wishful thinking, that makes his story so disturbingly relevant even 4 centuries later. For ultimately, isn't the history of False Dmitry I the most vivid testament to the fact that at certain moments in history, society is willing to believe any